Hello. Thank you for joining us today for our session, Cultivating Learning, Analyzing Primary Sources to Teach the Japanese American World War II Experience. I see some of you have already been introducing yourselves in the chat. It's so great to have you here. I'm Philippa Arapaport. I'm the lead for education and engagement at the Smithsonian Office of Educational Technology, which is a central education office at the Smithsonian, and it's the office behind the Smithsonian Learning Lab. I'm joined today by Lynn Yamasaki. She's the Director of Education at the Japanese American National Museum. And if I say JANM, that's what I mean, the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. So in this session today, we'll explore the unjust forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast during World War II. And we'll practice techniques to examine primary source materials from JANM's collection, including government-issued documents, artwork, and personal histories to introduce this topic to students. We'll focus on close looking and critical thinking to consider the forced removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans and how it is that such a massive violation of rights happened within our democracy. We'll also share with you classroom-ready resources to use with your students, but the strategies we'll discuss can be used to explore primary source documents in any classroom. I also want to say that I did this exercise with Lynn maybe 5 years ago at the Japanese American National Museum, and the exercise was so powerful that it continues to influence my reading of historical documents, social media, and other writings. So I'm so pleased that Lynn is leading this session today for our Cultivating Learning series. So just a few logistics before we dive in. As we're getting started, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. We'll be sharing resources today from the Smithsonian Learning Lab. I'll put all relevant links in the chat as we get to them. And I've also put them into a Learning Lab collection. The link for that collection is shared in the description of this video. The Learning Lab is a free online platform where you can discover digital museum resources from across the Smithsonian and beyond. You can create interactive learning experiences with them, and then you can share your discoveries and creations with others. Today's session is one in a series that we call Cultivating Learning, and this is a monthly offering in which featured educators model teaching techniques for using digital museum resources to support student learning in diverse learning environments. The Smithsonian Office of Educational Technology offers a range of online learning to support you as well. I'll put the link in the chat for our Learning Lab Help Center, and you can also see it on the bottom right of the screen. But on our help page, which you can access from the bottom of any page on the Smithsonian Learning Lab, you'll find step-by-step instructions to discover, create, and share digital museum content in the lab. You'll also see there our new series of short YouTube videos to guide you through everything that you can do in the lab. You'll also find their archived professional development programs aimed to support educators. Today's session will also be archived, so if you'd like to watch it again later or share it with a friend, you can access the archive at the Help Center along with the other archived sessions. And you can also watch it at the same link you're watching the session from now. Today's session is meant to be interactive, so we'd love to hear from you. If you're joining us by YouTube, you can put your comments there on the far right. If you're joining us by Facebook, you'll see the comment section on the bottom center. So we'd like to start today off with a question. So please just post your answers in the chat and I'll turn it over to Lynn while the answers are coming in. But the question we want to start with is, whose history gets remembered? Whose history gets remembered? And I'll turn it over to Lynn.
Okay, thanks, Philippa. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you all for joining us. Just give a couple of moments to kind of ponder this question. I think when we are thinking about history, it's interesting to think about not only how histories are remembered, but also thinking about like whose perspectives get put to the forefront. Are they always accurate? Is the most known histories the most truthful histories? And it's just kind of something that I think we should kind of consider during our time together here as we look at primary source materials and the various ways in which different perspectives share the same event in history. So any thoughts that you want to share, you're welcome to put those in the chat.
Sometimes there's a lag or people are just thinking about it.
Yeah.
While we're waiting, I may as well throw out something. Oh, wait, something's coming through. Tess is saying often the winners are those who hold the most power.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we think about especially historical events such as wars or things of that nature, often we have, the person who won is happy to share that history. And then perhaps the, perspective of those that didn't have a favorable outcome might downplay that history. Mm-hmm. And Ashley has said, hi, Ashley, personal connection, something we have a personal connection with, right? Yes. Rania, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah. So why don't we, you're welcome to continue to post your responses. I think it's, I'm enjoying the responses we've had so far. So thank you very much for that. But I think we'll go ahead and kind of start with this in mind throughout our time together. I hope that this question, is something that's still, brewing in our brains as we continue to share time together this evening. But wanted to share a bit about the institution from which I'm coming. As Philippa said, we're based in Los Angeles. We are we're an institution that shares about the Japanese American experience, but it's really about, if you look at our mission, using the history of this one ethnic group and considering it how it connects and intersects with a broader American story. I'll say that since our founding in 1985, we've really been about telling stories. And that's what museums do, I think. And I think especially in the early years, it was about telling these untold stories that hadn't even been exchanged among family members in some cases. The World War II incarceration is definitely a big part of our narrative. Not the only part, but it's a very big and important part in terms of directing and how we think about that history as it relates to today. Right. Thank you so much again for these incoming comments. I appreciate that. And then just to kind of give a quick overview of the incarceration experience, following the events of Pearl Harbor in 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president at the time, issued Executive Order 9066, which authorized the creation of a military zone all along the West Coast. And from that zone, any and all persons could be excluded. It did not mention Japanese people by name, but that's the group of people that was primarily affected by this. So, Japanese Americans all along this designated zone along the West Coast were forcibly removed from their homes and from their communities. And then in most cases, they were incarcerated first in these temporary detention centers and then removed to one of 10 major prison camps, America's concentration camps. And, this applied to everyone of Japanese ancestry, regardless of citizenship. If you were born in the US but were of Japanese ancestry, this applied to you. Right. And so today, as we look at this history, we're going to examine artwork from our collection. We're going to look at some documents from JANM's collection to really explore a bit about this history. I will start by saying from the get-go, this is a very big topic, and we will only be kind of diving in a little bit today during our time together. But hopefully we'll be able to share the work that our institution does and share some of the lessons that can be used to teach this history. So again, like I said, keeping in mind that question during our time together, I think we're going to really focus primarily on language and perspective, and how that shapes perceptions of history over the course of time. I'm going to be focusing in on this little time period of the removal and detention in these temporary detention centers. I think a lot of times the larger camps get those narratives are heard, but I chose this window of time because I think when this history is taught, it's really it's about these moments, right? These moments of leaving behind your life, leaving behind, facing the uncertainty of where you're headed next. And there are these, that's a very pivotal moment in this experience. And the session is loosely generally based on a learning lab that will be put into the chat. And this is something that focuses, again, on these temporary detention centers. Right. So to start us off, I think we'll just do a little exercise that will examine what are often called civilian exclusion orders. So in this slide here, you can see these were these temporary detention orders that began to appear shortly after FDR issued Executive Order 9066 in February of 1942. So Pearl Harbor is in December of 1941, February of 1942. These start to show up in neighborhoods along the West Coast. And then by around August of 1942, 108 of these had been issued. And by around October of 42, all Japanese and Japanese Americans had been removed from the military area on that West Coast. Throughout our time together, I'm going to be using a lot of illustrations done by an artist named Mine Okubo. She is a Japanese-American artist. She was about 30 years old at the time of forced removal. She was living in Berkeley, California, up in the northern part of California. And then she and her family spent time in a temporary detention center before being moved to Topaz, Utah. And so this is her depiction of people examining this detention order posted in their neighborhood. She has a book called Citizen 13660, which is a really great just collection of her memories of this time period that has not only written word, but also these incredible illustrations. And so we'll be sharing more information about those images at the end. So I'm going to ask you all to take a close look at this temporary detention order. So in the next slide, we'll put up and then make it as big as you can on your screen. And I would ask and invite in responses in terms of what words you see that you think are misleading. If you have any more accurate words you would suggest, what things, if anything, surprise you. And then to consider if this notice had applied to you in your family, what questions would you have? Right, so put yourself in the place of kind of reading this document. Maybe I'll give about a minute or two for this. And thoughts can be shared in the chat.
If you're having trouble seeing the text on the slide, you can also follow that link and find it in there. I'm going to open it in another window so I don't lose this one and get this specific link for you.
Okay. So any thoughts, any words that stand out to you as being misleading, curious, puzzling? Thanks, Angela. Ellen is noticing the use of the term evacuated, as if it's, when there's an earthquake, a fire, a flood, that's when we often hear that term of being evacuated. And in this case, that wasn't the circumstances. Yeah, that alien and non-alien is something that definitely stands out as being pretty curious, right? Oh, thank you, Keiko. Yeah, so I think if we take a look at the next one. Oh, I'm getting an echo. No one else affected by that? If not, okay, it's not too bad. If we go to the next one, we'll see some of the words that many of you have pointed out. And definitely, yes, some of these questions are coming in. There's a lot of language here, right? It's a lot. And imagine if you were a first generation, not, English is not your first language, having to understand this, having to read this, and definitely, the use of like alien and non-alien. What is that? What is that? That is essentially a non-citizen and a citizen, but to use those words might have raised some red flags, right? And someone brought up the use of the term evacuated, which really is for the safety of those that are being taken away, but in this case it was a forced removal, right? So that's like the term that we'll often use at the museum and within the Japanese American community. And Tess has brought up a good question about those who were evacuated. What did they have to do with their things? How they get rid of these? They could only take what they could carry with them, right? So that meant that, there's the question of, well, what are we going to do with all of this stuff? Do we sell it? Do we get rid of it? How will we, manage this home that we have built? And there wasn't a lot of time either, right? And so, I think these are all really great things that are being brought up here in terms of the use of language on the part of the government to either downplay or else kind of soften the experience of this forced removal. And then also you will see circled at that bottom link is this term called that they're using assembly center, right? And that is historically what we will often call these temporary detention centers, right? It's and they were often like horse tracks, horse race tracks, where there were horse stalls that could house people in a hurry, while these 10 larger concentration camps were being built. And I think, while we're talking about language and euphemistic language, which we've kind of picked out here, one of the things I want to bring up is that you probably have heard me and noticed that I do use the term concentration camp when talking about this experience. And that is something that's very purposeful on the part of the museum. We use that in all of our, our wall text, our language, our tours. And that is we don't mean to equate or compare them to the concentration camps, or what are often called concentration camps that were taking place during World War II in Europe. But we do think it's very important to call things what they were, right? And so sometimes these are called internment camps or relocation camps, but we want to be sure to call them concentration camps. And by definition, a concentration camp is where somebody is sent not for any wrongdoing, but simply because of who they are. It is a term that the government initially used at the very beginning to speak about these places where Japanese Americans were detained, but then, quickly shifted the words and shifted the narrative, and in doing so shifted, I think, the narrative and the perception of these places, and not just at the moment, but throughout history. Again, not meaning to equate what was happening in America's concentration camps with what was going on in Europe to the Jewish population. And we would, I think, argue that to call those concentration camps is in fact also a euphemism for the death camps or the extermination camps that were happening there. But just wanted to bring that up because in case anybody is wondering why it is that I'm calling them concentration camps. So thank you for kind of doing that little exercise with us. And I think that this is a great way to look at historical documents, right? And just to pick them apart and really think about word choice. Sometimes it's just one word and how that shapes how something is remembered, right? So if we go on to the next one, we'll see what would have followed these orders being shown. And I think it's, thinking about all of those things that we've brought up in terms of the questions that we have and the uncertainty and like, what do you mean by, non-alien? Does that apply to me? Then we have, this is kind of a depiction, again, by Mineo Kubo, of a community, of a population who are following through with these orders. So an invitation for any observations. What do you see here? What are you noticing? Does anything stand out to you in particular?
While we're waiting for it to come in the chat, I keep getting stuck on even the word camp. And then here you see this bus. It's so misleading almost,
Yeah. Definitely, I think, especially when we're talking to young people, when we hear the word camp, it's, this is not a s'mores campfire situation that we're talking about, but that's, that word definitely has, visualizations that come with it. A lot of great observations coming in the chat. Thank you so much. We have, yes, that weapon, that gun is definitely something that catches the eye, right? The gentleman standing in front of the bus, right at the front of the line there, is holding a rifle. And yes, it's military police holding a guard with a gun, which conveys that this is not a choice, right? This is a forced removal. And we have luggage left behind. Absolutely. Someone brought up earlier that you could not take pets with you. So that's something that is very, I think we can all kind of, if we're pet owners, we can imagine like that's a member of your family. And so pets were not allowed. We have, and that's so interesting, Keiko, in terms of like the bus looking like a school bus and how it kind of it looks like just a bus, right? But yet when we know where they're headed, the circumstances under which they are being removed, it's not going on a field trip. Difference in ages, right? Tessa's noticed that there's a child here. And that's, I think, really important part of the story, right? Is that this applied if you were a baby, this applied to you. If you were, a young child and had never even been to Japan, you were still viewed as, suspect and therefore fell under these orders. Yeah. So thank you for that. And definitely I think this really captures like a moment, right? A moment in this history. Yeah. Okay. It's like residential, it's a neighborhood, right? So this is one depiction of this forced removal time period, right? And so that's an art piece. And then I would also like to show another moving on to another artifact from our collection. And this is a pamphlet that was distributed to these so-called evacuees. And I'm going to ask that you take a look at, particularly at the first two definitions there that the government is asking us to keep in mind. The one for assembly center, and then for the, on the right side, and for a relocation center. So take a moment just to read those. So this is the first of three descriptions of these temporary detention centers that we're going to look at this evening. So this is a document, of course. And any observations about that definition of the assembly center? And this is what I described was often temporary detention centers that were at, racetracks, former horse stalls. Yeah. Yeah, some of these were like this convenient, right? It's like this this favor that is being done to those this is impacting. Yeah. Opportunity, awaiting the opportunity, how convenient. Yeah, it really does, I think, kind of downplay what's going on in a very obvious way, as we see from in hindsight, right? Roxanne has noticed something that I've always really questioned, this pioneer community. Like, what does that even mean, right? So, yeah. Okay. Thank you. So this is, again, an official government document and coming from the War Relocation Authority, which was a government group set up to execute this whole forced removal process. And it's this question and answer pamphlet. Okay, so tuck that into your brains along with everything that's kind of been observed here by the group. And let's look at another depiction of these temporary detention centers. And for that, we'll revisit our friend Mineo Kubo. So these are two illustrations from her book, Citizen 13660. And that's her family's name, number that they were assigned. Every family got a number. And so again, I would invite any observations here. So this is her depiction of the same thing that the government had described in that pamphlet. So what do you notice? What stands out? Cobwebs, yes. Yeah, she's very clear about drawing those. Yeah. The horse stall, you can see that little half door there, unhealthy, unkempt. As these are coming in, I want to share Okubo's, what she wrote about. This is what she wrote to accompany the image on the left. So it says, the guide left us at the door of stall 50. We walked in and dropped our things inside the entrance. The place was in semi-darkness. Light barely came through the dirty window on either side of the entrance. A swinging half door divided the 20 by 9-foot stall into 2 rooms. And then she goes on to explain the rear room had housed the horse and the front room the fodder. Both rooms showed signs of a hurried whitewashing. Spiderwebs, horsehair, and hay had been whitewashed with the walls. Huge spikes and nails stuck out all over the walls. A 2-inch layer of dust covered the floor, but on removing it, we discovered that linoleum, the color of redwood, had been placed over the rough, manure-covered boards. And so I think to accompany that, her very, very descriptive kind of written description along with this image, it really conveys so much. One of the things that I always like to to share that really made an impact on me is, early on in my time working at JANM, I was having on a tour with one of our docents who had first-person experience of this, and he says, he was about 10 at the time, and he says he'll never forget the smell of the prior tenants. And to me, just that one description really conveys so much, right, in terms of your senses and sense of smell, and then I think combined with depictions like what we're seeing here, we really do get a sense of the terrible conditions under which these people were living after being removed from their homes and their communities. Okay, so that's depiction number 2 of these temporary detention centers. And lastly, we have a video clip of an oral history from a woman named Yuriko Chiyama. Is this something we're able to play? I believe that's a link in our, let's see. Let me see if I can let me see if I'll find the link here.
Here, I have it. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Let me just do a new window.
Okay.
Wait. Oh, okay.
We were sent to Assembly Center because the relocation camps, which we later called concentration camps, weren't built. But they use, for assembly centers, they use, racetracks and fairgrounds. And I don't know, there are about, I think they said about 16 of those places. And well, we were sent to Santa Anita, which is the largest, had almost 20,000 there, and it's a racetrack. And so most of us were billeted in the horse stalls. And I think at fairgrounds, it was the same thing. They had horses too, I guess. So they stayed in, horse stalls too. A lot of the Issei started getting sick because of the horsemen there that, you smell and you see there.
Thank you, Philippa. So I think I would now invite any kind of thoughts on, so that was our third depiction of these temporary detention centers, right? So first was this official government document. The second was an artist's interpretation through both visual and written. And then the third is this oral history. And so really kind of consider how all 3 of these depictions are of the same thing, are similar or different, how different each means of telling history differ, right? And how that shapes history for us today as we look back on experiences like this. So yeah, conscious of time, I'll just give a few moments to place your thoughts there, and definitely feel free to continue placing them as I continue to share a little bit here as we wrap up. And I think as we do kind of, as I close up my part here, I just want to circle back again to JANM's mission, which we'll see again on the next slide. And really the fact that, this history isn't just a history of Japanese Americans. It's part of American history, and in our work as educators, I think it's important that we know not only what happened to Japanese Americans on the West Coast during World War II, but also think about, how this happened, why this happened, so that when history repeats itself, because we know that it does, unfortunately, right? We do see different groups of individuals being discriminated against. We do see rights being violated. So when we see history repeating itself, when we see discrimination against any one group of people, we are able to stand up for each other and speak out for others, because we know what happens when people don't do that, right? Very few people stood up for Japanese Americans during this time period. There was definitely a handful, but that wasn't the majority by any means. And I think it's important for us and for the students that we're teaching to know that democracy is very fragile, right? And to know what can happen when we allow it to break down, right? This happened very easily. I like to share with students that when you really think about it, it was just some pieces of paper signed by some people in power. And then in a matter of months, like not even a year, the rights of about 120,000 Japanese Americans were violated. And this is, this didn't happen just out of nowhere. This was had deep roots in racist sentiments. So even, an offensive joke that is exchanged at school can contribute to an attitude that can contribute to a much, much larger violation of rights. And so just wanted to kind of quickly share that by using our collection, and also wanted to visit some of the comments in our chat here about, the way in which, history is remembered. And I'm really appreciating all of these. The kind of the dissonance between what was promised and advertised versus the reality. And thank you for that, Keiko. And Ellen, I think that like these layers, right, it's really, I think we all think about this in our teaching, right, the layering of information. And so really, I think with each added source, you get a broader picture. Okay. Well, I think that was it for me in our little kind of time together, sharing a bit of our collection and a bit about this history. But again, so much appreciation and gratitude for everyone's participation in the chat.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So if anyone has any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for it to come in, would you like to walk us through some of the collections and links that you shared?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we have, Mineo Kubo, as I explained, is an artist that we really, she's one of my favorites, and I know I'm not alone in really admiring her very truthful representation of this history. And so this is a collection that, yes, Keiko is digitized. It is, we have a few of our collections are entirely digitized and available online, and this is one of them, which I'm really grateful for. It's also available through Google Arts and Culture. But so this is something that you can access in your teaching, for use in your teaching, absolutely. And it's also, so on our website, you can see the images. If you wanted the written descriptions that accompany that would be in her published book. And again, that's called Citizen 13660. And then another resource that I wanted to draw your attention to is one called Exploring America's Concentration Camps. And, this is some of the resources that we looked at today are featured here. This is a little bit different than perhaps many resources on the Japanese American experience, in that it is organized thematically or else by campsite. So this is through, it's like a microsite on the JANM website. And so I think if we go to this here as an example, if we went to so under themes in the upper right corner there, if you go to security and then barbed wire fence, you can see these little mini stories that use artifacts from our collection, and it's meant for students. So it has a lot of questions, and students can go through this website and use it and answer questions about it. And if you scroll down, you'll see one of the artifacts that we looked at today. This is, again, focusing on that theme of security. And you'll see our pamphlet that we took a close look at today. So that's an example of how we use some of our collections in some of these online resources. And then the last resource I want to share was where the Yuri Kochiyama oral history came from. And that is this website called Discover Nikkei, which is a project of JANM. And it's full of a lot of oral histories that are kind of organized in little snippets. So like the one that we saw today is a segment of a longer interview of her. And in that one, she's really describing the temporary detention center. And so that's another resource that you can utilize there.
Thank you, Lynn.
Sure.
I'm just busily posting some links in the chat.
Thank you.
And so all of this is put together into one Learning Lab collection, and I'm just putting that link in the chat too. And that is here. And so this collection includes the content that Lynn has shared with you. You can see there's a section here for Japanese American National Museum resources, and you can access everything from that collection, including 2 teaching collections from JANM. And then I included some Smithsonian resources there as well, including an online exhibition, Righting a Wrong, Japanese Americans and World War II. And then there's some additional resources. And then at the end, we'll actually just have the archive of this session, so you'll have it all in one place.
Great.
So,
Thank you. And I also want to share, I know many of you are not near Los Angeles, but we definitely invite you to come to utilize our resources online. We also have museum virtual visits. If you're classroom teachers, we offer those. We would love to meet your students, as well as educator workshops, both virtual and in person. So if you have any questions or would like to further explore anything, our website has all of our information, which is in the resources that Filippo has just shared.
thank you so much, Lynn. I'm just sort of scrolling up to see make sure we didn't miss a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think we're good though. Yeah.
Thanks, Esther. Applause for everybody. I think that it was really, really appreciated everyone's contribution to our looking today.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for walking us through this really important time and these great techniques to look closely. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we hope to see you at another Cultivating Learning session.
Thank you all. Thanks for having JANM.
Bye-bye.